Hey YouTube world, what's going on? Mark here from TST Industries, back in the garage. And today I will be guiding you through the installation process of an old product that we have recently redesigned to provide you with a much easier installation process, a cleaner finish look, some weight savings, and yes, I am talking about our TST Elite-1 Fender Eliminator for the 2022 and up Yamaha R7. Now in this video, we will be installing the low mount Fender Eliminator option, meaning the closeout will replace the OEM fender and close off the hole left behind from removing that piece. And then the low mount bracket will sit closer to the rear shock. Now please note, this does require permanent modifications to the bike, but some simple garage tools are all that you will need to install this kit. Without further ado, let's go ahead and jump right in and begin by showing you how to remove the OEM fender. To begin this disassembly process, we want to first go ahead and remove our license plate. This is something that obviously you'll need on the new setup. So whatever hardware you have fastening it to the OEM fender, go ahead and remove and retain if you feel the need. If you don't have these fancy little reflectors, guess who does? TST Industries. Once you have the OEM fender and hardware off, you can push this all to the side. Begin by grabbing a small pick or a flathead screwdriver, Phillips head screwdriver, whatever small tool you have, to go ahead and remove these two push pins located near the taillight into the fairings. And then there is one center push pin on the sub tray underneath the bike. So let's go ahead and reset these locks by pressing in on the center. And then the one in the center of the undertail. And now what you can do is, with your fingers, go ahead and simply remove those from their locking positions. You don't really want to use tools to pry them out. If you do, you can scuff up some of these plastics. So just keep that in mind. With those push pin fasteners removed, we can go ahead and hop on over to the top side of the bike and begin by removing our passenger seat. Now with the passenger seat removed, we can focus on removing some of the hardware that will ultimately give us access to removing the rider seat and all of the fairings. So we're going to start by focusing on these 4 bolts located on the exterior fairings, and then the center bolt located on the taillight cap fairing. They are all 4mm heads, and a hex key, Allen key T-handle should do the job. Whatever tool of choice you like. Now before I remove these bolts, I do want to mention that underneath them, each of them have collars. All 4 of them have collars that need to be removed when you remove the bolts. As I speed through this process, you will see what I'm referencing. Now we can remove this center bolt. When you remove this, you're going to pry up and outward, releasing it from the locking tab geometry we have on this inner fairing. Next, we can focus on removing these 2 push pins located at the rear seat shroud we have here in between the rider seat and the passenger seat, and we will reset those locking rivets by pressing on their center. Instead of removing them, we can simply pry it outward, disengaging the locking tabs that are located underneath, and then we will simply slide up, releasing it ultimately from all of its locking geometry that interfaces with one another. Now this has given us access to the 2 5mm bolts that are locking and securing the rider seat. Try and hold on to those bolts when you remove them. If they fall in the abyss, you may have a tough time getting them out. Now with the rider seat uninstalled, we can focus on removing all of these other fasteners that will allow us to then uninstall the side fairings. So first we're going to focus on these push pin fasteners. We have 4 of them located, 2 on these shrouds and then 2 on the front tank shrouds. We're going to reset them all. Next, we will go ahead and remove these two rearmost bolts on the outer fairings. Those are 4mm Allen key, hex key bolts. Now we have one more 4mm bolt to remove, and that is located on the rearmost section of the tail. And it is interlocking these two outer fairing shrouds together. So we'll remove that, toss it aside. Now we will move back down into this section and proceed with removing these two 10mm bolts located on the outermost section of the fairings. Okay, and now with all of these bolts removed from some of the fairings that we need to actually remove from the bike, we can go ahead and go on underneath. We have 6 push pin rivets we need to pop out of place that will allow us to remove these fairings and ultimately give us access to remove the OEM fender. So let's go ahead and hop down below. So coming on over to the side of the bike, we have 3 push pin rivets we need to remove from this side and repeat those steps on the opposite side. We have 2 located here on this undertail panel, and then we have 1 located right in between these 2 side fairings that secure the tank side panel to the tail fairing. So we're gonna go ahead and reset all of those by pressing down on the center and removing them by hand. Now we can go ahead and remove this entire tail fairing and the inner tail shroud. Now, the only thing locking this tail fairing in place right now are 2 friction fastener posts that simply need to be removed by pulling outward. It is going to feel a little unsettling if you've never done this before, but I promise everything will be fine. So we have 1 here and 1 here. We're gonna start on the rearmost section of the tail by gently pulling, and just like that, it pops out. Then we'll apply a little bit more pressure, pull outward on the front one, and then slide back. Now we'll highlight those posts now that the fairing is off, but we have 1 here and 1 here, and they are just arrow-shaped posts that go into this grommet and this grommet as well. Now, as you can see, that has given us full access to the side of the bike. Let's go ahead and repeat those steps on the opposite side. Now, as you saw, when I removed the final 2 push pin rivets from this undertail panel, this started to fall. We're gonna go ahead and remove this and reuse this undertail panel, but for now we can toss it to the side and get a full glimpse of the undertail once we remove the fairings. So here we are in all of its glory, the entire subframe section of the Yamaha YZF R7. In order to remove this OEM fender, we do need to go ahead and disconnect the turn signal connectors and the license plate connector. Those are located underneath the ECU that is located in the tail compartment. Now the ECU rests on these 2 posts that are mounted to the subtray. We're going to gently pull up, freeing it from those posts, sliding it towards the front of the bike, and then we're gently going to place the ECU on the side, ensuring that we're not putting any strain on the connector or the wires. Now the connectors we need to focus on are routed down this side of the bike, the right side if you're facing the front, the left side if you're facing the rear, the brake side of the bike. We have 3 connectors we need to disconnect and remove, one of which is this gray connector. And if you don't know how to disconnect it, it's pretty simple. You lift up on the rear face of this locking tab and just gently pull, releasing it from its locking feature. You can toss that to the side, pull out the other wire with the white connector on it. And again, if you don't know how to disconnect, you push down on this tab and then pull outward. Now the last connector is a black connector that is hidden a little bit more towards the front of the bike. It is just like the white connector, and these are your turn signal connectors and the license plate light connectors. So we're gonna do the same thing here. lift up. And if you can't lift up, sometimes these connectors can be a little finicky. You can take a small screwdriver or a small pick and just very gently get underneath it, pry up, and then pull. There you have it. Now, before we go ahead and begin routing the wires out of the tail section, we have two clips located on the rear of the bike. One of them is a reusable fastener, and the other one is a zip tie. Technically, you can reuse a zip tie if you are careful enough, but I'm going to show you what you can do here. So we're going to pull gently on the tail light, releasing it from its post. It's one of those tab locks that slides into a grommet. So we'll just toss that to the side for now. And for this lock, the black one, it is a little tricky, but you need to pry up on the teeth. So let's go ahead and actually cut the zip tie first, giving us a little bit more slack. This is such a cramped space. Technically, you can go ahead and remove this subframe brace if you wanted to. And when you use dikes or diagonal cutters to cut this zip tie, please be careful that you are not puncturing the wires or the sheathing. So we're just gonna go ahead and cut that zip tie loose. It was routed through the subframe underneath where the fender is located. That gave us a little bit more slack for the wires. Let's get them out of the routing channel that is molded into the subframe and the sub tray, I should say. Now we still need to get this wire clip free, giving me some extra strength, extra slack definitely helped on that front. We can pull the 3 wires that we disconnected out of the subframe and toss them to the side. And then we can go ahead and reposition the OEM tail light in its grommet, and we will get back to routing those wires once we're finished. Now we will hop on to the underside and actually remove the OEM fender. Now focusing on the underside of the bike, we have these 2 bolts located on this side. They're the exact same on the opposite side. That is all that is holding the OEM fender in place at this time. Now, as you begin removing these bolts, it is important to note you do want to brace and support the OEM fender. Once you remove them, the fender will just want to drop thanks to gravity. So please ensure that you are supporting this, preventing damage to the bike, yourself, your feelings. Let's begin. Now with the final bolt removed, we can carefully begin to snake the wires through the opening in the subframe, ensuring that the connectors aren't getting snagged on anything. And now your OEM fender is removed. With the OEM fender removed and all of the fairings off of the bike, we can easily see where exactly we are going to mount our new ABS injection molded Undertail Closeout. Now we have a couple features on this closeout to help you identify where you will be mounting it. First off, I want to make note of this pronged feature on the front that will be located towards the rear of the bike. It's a 2-step little feature right here that will interlock with the lower lip of the OEM taillight. We also have this cutout on this side that will interlock with this face on the OEM subtray. So if you see it together just like so, you can envision how the rest of it will snap together. At this point, we can go ahead and grab our hardware that pertains to the closeout only. But I do want to mention, upon removing your OEM fender, you will see some red or orangish powder coming out from those welded nuts on the subframe. That is Loctite from the OEM fender being installed. We do not recommend using Loctite on our Undertail Closeout, as it can off-gas incorrectly and ultimately deteriorate the plastic of our Undertail Closeout, causing it to be brittle, and it can crack and just fall apart. If you are going to use a thread locking agent, we would recommend using Vibrotite, or you can simply install this, and if there are remnants of that Loctite on there, it has already off gas, you will be safe to simply insert the bolts and bottom them out without fearing any damage from occurring. So let's go ahead. We're going to grab the button head bolts that we include and the washers, feed the bolts through the washers, and ultimately they will go through the closeout and into these 4 holes on the subframe. Before I do that, I will go ahead and take the provided push pin fasteners. We include the dart clips, and you will feed them through the closeout, blocking off the holes left behind. Now, those holes are for use with our high mount systems, either the adjustable or the fixed high mount standard bracket. Being that we're installing the low mount bracket on this bike, I will plug those holes left behind and you'll have a much more seamless look. Now we can go ahead, grab the bolts and washers we've already got set up, and our 4mm hex key or Allen key. Make sure all the features are interlocking with one another and begin installing this hardware. Now, I like to practice this method where you install one bolt just slightly to grab a few bites, and then you go through, grab another bolt, and kind of go catty corner to it, ensuring that you're not cross-threading and that everything is interlocking with one another correctly. Once you have 2 bolts in, you can go through and proceed with the rest. And even as I tighten them down, I like to go in a crisscross pattern, ensuring that the closeout is not going to sit at any sort of skewed position or push any strain onto the closeout and ultimately, potentially cause some sort of damage down the road. With all of the bolts bottomed out, I like to give them a nice little snug turn, about a 1/16 or an 1/8 of an inch in rotation. And there you have it. At this point, we are going to go ahead and install the low mount bracket. But as I mentioned in the intro, that does require permanent modifications. The owner of this particular bike does not want those modifications. They do not want the low mount bracket. So we're going to go ahead and hand it over to Bart, where he will show you the installation process on a different color R7, but the entire process will be exactly the same. So let's go ahead and hand it over.
Let's now get into position where we're going to be creating the holes for mounting our license plate bracket. That position is right underneath the fuse box here. Let's remove the fuse box. To do that, I'm prying towards the front of the bike on this ratcheting clip. When you press this towards this panel, that allows you to withdraw it. If you have any other wires around this feature, you need to get them away now. This sometimes droops in the way. So if we take up the slack here, we create enough room around here to drop our template washer plate on. This really fits only one way. If you try to fit it the other way, it just won't fit. So pretty simple. This window is meant to accept this protruding feature here, and we designed this plate to just plop down and fit into position. It's gonna have just a little bit of play. If you don't move it around too much, it just falls into its position, and that's good to go. I do like to drill the holes, the final holes, slightly larger than the fasteners, so that gives us a little bit of opportunity to adjust later on. Here I'm using a punch. I will be punching the centers where I'm going to be drilling. You can use a marker, you can use a pencil. I like a punch because it leaves a dent for me and centers my drill. All right, that's center. Okay, those are going to be the mounting holes for our license plate bracket. They are going to be the counterparts to these holes. Now, if you're running a license plate light on this setup, you'll want to have an extra hole for routing the wires through. And if you're running some kind of a signaling system setup that wires through here, you'll also have to have a yet larger hole for that. For us, I am going to provide a hole just for the license plate light. All right, that looks good here. Now you can choose to drill this with or without the bracket in place. I don't mind it being there. I'm also a big fan of step drilling. So I start with a small drill bit and I enlarge it to the final size later on. Here I am using an 1/8 inch bit. You guys across the sea from us, 3mm is what I would choose. All right, that's looking good there. We're drilling polypropylene, so it doesn't take very much to penetrate. Just be careful not to snag any of the wires. We are fairly close to all these wiring looms. Want to make sure you stay away from that as much as possible. All right, let's see how we did. Holes look clean. Our fasteners are 6mm. That's about 0.235 inch. Here I'm cutting a 0.25 inch hole. That will give me a little bit of adjustability. All right, for the wiring hole, I'm not sure if I need to go any larger than that, probably do. 1/8 inch is gonna be just a little too small. 1/8 inch would fit our conductors, but not our sheathing. So I'm gonna switch over to probably a 3/16. I've actually opted for a 5/32. That should be enough. I'm gonna check that. I like to have a pretty tight fit around the insulation so that we don't have a lot of water penetrating through around all that stuff. That's looking good now. Once the holes are ready for fastener installation here, we're going to drop the template washer back on here, grab our actual license plate bracket oriented appropriately. This is upside down. This is the correct side. So the point will point down. We will grab a screw and a washer that came with this kit. Get it through one of these slots. Feed it in from the bottom to the top and use one of the nylock locking nuts on top of this connection here. Bottom will take a 4mm Allen, and up on top I have a 10mm hex. Use a socket on that. I just get these threads engaged and close to the bottom, and I will finish up this connection at the very end. Tighten it all down at the very end after all the fasteners are in and everything's in position. At this point we grab the other fastener, the other screw, and a washer. Fit it through the other slot and continue as previously. For my final adjustment and tightening here, I'm going to use an L wrench because it just ends up fitting in there a lot better. As I can see right now, it's already not sitting level. I think at this point I'm going to want to make the license plate bracket sit level. The way I'm checking level here is against this edge. So I want to produce the same amount of gap. What I've done here is just basically just pressed it all the way down, and it looks like the gap is just a parallel line to the split line between this portion and this portion of the sub tray. So I think I'm pretty comfortable with that. I'm just gonna get this to full tightness now. Just check that I didn't actually knock it out of balance here, and it's still level, so we're good. Now full tightness on this, you have to be mindful not to over tighten it, because we are sandwiching a piece of polypropylene section in between the two brackets. So we did provide you with locking nuts that will prevent these screws from loosening. So no worries there. Just need it to be tight enough not to vibrate, but not too tight, because we don't want to squish that polypropylene. All right, this is looking pretty good. Like I said, we are running a license plate light on this setup, so I will show you how to route it. As you can see here, we have a relief, and that relief is meant for overlaying our cable exit from our license plate light capsule right in there. And the wire goes into the other relief that's against the backside of that bracket. Now carefully snake it through like that. Make sure that it's actually oriented appropriately. This cable is flat, so we want to make sure that it's not twisted as it goes over that whole assembly. And this is why we provided that relief in there, so that you can put this license plate light right there. If you choose, you can use a zip tie, a cable tie. We did provide 2 little slots in there. This is not absolutely necessary. This is for you guys that are really finicky with getting all your wires tied down. And it's very optional here, but I'll show you how to do it. You just get your wire tie across here, and you would tighten it up after everything's in place, including the license plate. For me, I think this is a little redundant because we have enough passages through here that keep this wire from moving around. I'll just leave the wire tie out. Let's put the end of the wire through to the inside of the bike, through that 3rd hole that we drilled. All right, make sure that there's enough slack here. And that's looking pretty good to me. I'm gonna replace my fuse box in its place. All right, that's looking good up here. Everything's looking good down here. All right, so we can proceed to the reassembly of all the components now. I'm not gonna demonstrate the connection means for the license plate light. That was captured in a separate video that is dedicated to the license plate light installation. So I'll just do that off camera. And from this point forward, it'll just basically be the reverse order of disassembly up until we get to the tightening procedure for this and the installation of our license plate. Let's get our license plate in here. The license plate sandwiches the license plate light in between itself and the bracket. You do have a double side tape section here in case you choose to use it. I typically don't ever use it. The clamping force is enough. Here you see me using the aluminum anodized hardware that we sell as an optional kit. It's not necessary. You could either reuse what you had or grab a set of those reflective screws. I just thought this bike deserves a little bit of style down here. All right, you guys, that's pretty much it here. As you can see, produced this result in roughly a half hour, give or take a couple. If I'm not yapping towards the camera, I can do it pretty fast. This does involve putting a couple of screw holes into your sub tray. So this may not be your style. If you're into a direct bolt-on, we do have the rear mount versions as well. We also have a video showing you how to do that. So evaluate both flows of installation before you commit to a purchase. We also have a video instructing how to install all the different types of signaling equipment that we have for this bike. So check that out on our YouTube channel or our website, tstindustries.com. Other than that, I'm gonna throw a leg over this thing and go take you for a ride. Have fun, see you later, be safe.